that both your microphone and camera are turned on, so that everyone can hear and see you clearly. If you forget to unmute during the call, there will be a pop-up message to remind you. If you see this message, simply click on the unmute button. Follow these simple steps and you'll be part of our live stream in no time. One last thing, remember to rotate your device to landscape mode. Join us! After joining the meeting room, click on the Unmute and Start Video buttons at the bottom of the app. This will ensure that both your microphone and camera are turned on, so that everyone can hear and see you clearly. If you forget to unmute during the call, there will be a pop-up message to remind you. If you see this message, simply click on the Unmute button. Follow these simple steps and you'll be part of our live stream in no time. One last thing, remember to rotate your device to landscape mode. Join us! After joining the meeting room, click on the Unmute and Start Video buttons at the bottom of the app. This will ensure that both your microphone and camera are turned on, so that everyone can hear and see you clearly. If you forget to unmute during the call, there will be a pop-up message to remind you. If you see this message, simply click on the Unmute button. Follow these simple steps and you'll be part of our live stream in no time. One last thing, remember to rotate your device to landscape mode. Join us! After joining the meeting room, click on the Unmute and Start Video buttons at the bottom of the app. This will ensure that both your microphone and camera are turned on, so that everyone can hear and see you clearly. If you forget to unmute during the call, there will be a pop-up message to remind you. If you see this message, simply click on the Unmute button. Follow these simple steps and you'll be part of our live stream in no time. One last thing, remember to rotate your device to landscape mode. Join us! After joining the meeting room, click on...
Hi, good morning, everybody. Yeah, Hong Kong looks very good. For a city without its soul, it looks very good. So, welcome, Tom. Tom Setter, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks
and
for
Mark.
having me.
Yeah. Mark, thank you for always helping me. And maybe you start with you, Mark.
Sure. Hi, Jimmy. Good morning. Jimmy Lai and I and Mark Clifford are here in Hong Kong, kicking off the latest installment in our weekly greetings to the world with various guests. And today I'm delighted to welcome Thomas Shattuck, who's a research associate in the Asia program at the Foreign Policy Research Institute in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, United States of America, of course. Tom's a Taiwan and cross-strait expert who is going to talk with Jimmy today about the issues primarily related to Taiwan and cross-strait relations. Tom, you've just been on vacation. You've come out of the mountains of northern Pennsylvania with, I guess, no internet, no cell, and you came back to find sort of a year's worth of news on Taiwan and the cross-strait relations just in the short time that you've been gone. So let's start with Undersecretary of State Keith Krog's visit to Taiwan, which is the highest-ranking U.S. official probably since relations with the PRC in the U.S. were normalized back in 1979. This seems to have ignited a great deal of excitement in Taiwan, a great deal of unhappiness would probably be a mild way of putting it in Beijing and in the PRC. So what's that about? Why did Undersecretary of State Krog go? What did he accomplish, and what's the fallout?
Yeah, thank you first, Mark and Jimmy, for having me today. And yeah, it was quite the news cycle to come back to on Monday, where Undersecretary of State Keith Krog visited officially for the funeral for former President Lee, but there was a second motivation to sort of jumpstart any sort of negotiations for a BTA, a bilateral trade agreement between the United States and Taiwan. It seems there's some differentiation in reporting where an actual BTA would have to be negotiated through the U.S. Trade Representative. So this is kind of the precursor to any official negotiations, where he spoke with various people, notably Morris Chang, who was the former chairman of TSMC, and they're just kind of discussing the lay of the land before they really get into any negotiations between now and whenever the VTA gets signed.
So trade deals are usually the kind of thing that put people to sleep. Let me kick it to you, Jimmy. Why would a trade deal between the U.S. and Taiwan be such a big deal and something that we should wake up and pay attention to?
No, I think trade deal is very important for Taiwan now because, Taiwan trades mostly with China. If China sanctioned the trade with Taiwan, that could be a big setback for Taiwan. And with the increased support, military support of the U.S., now is for Taiwan's economy to take off because the greater national security, the greater confidence the investors, feel about Taiwan and invest the money. I think now, actually, investors are already taking note of this change. The undersecretary who just went to the Taiwan, like what Tom said, I think it's just the beginning of upgrade of the Taiwanese status. There will be a lot of upgrading of Taiwan's status with the relationship with the U.S. The U.S. sanctioned. Let's just take the U.S. sanction. The U.S. sanction has made China, in a lot of ways, have to rely on Taiwan. Just the sanction on technology, considering all the technology startups, these complementary are the technology to support its innovation or creation. If the technology parts, knowledge, and devices are sanctioned against China, the technology startup there cannot function in their research. They have to move to Taiwan. So Taiwan will become the Asia's Silicon Valley. And just one point, this will make Taiwan very important. Because technology will decide where the economy goes. And I think this is crucial for Taiwan. And I think the trade deal with Taiwan and will lead with the U.S. will lead trade deals with the European Unions, Japan, and all others. I think all the other countries has to come to the aid of Taiwan because they are all facing the same enemy. Being alone, they don't have the leverage against CCP. They have to be aligned together in the same effort to keep America's happiness in Asia. To keep America's happiness in Asia, Taiwan is a very good leverage. If Taiwan fails, the credibility of the U.S. will fail. It will be like Berlin in the Soviet Cold War time. So it's very important to keep Taiwan for the U.S. and for all the free world countries to come to to come together and support this effort, because Asia is going to be the biggest market for all these countries. Asia is going to be most dynamic political arena in the world just because China is there. Balancing the power of China is a goal of the free world countries. So their alignment together is a very obvious fact that people come to realize, and that will be the reality coming forward. I think Tom has to make a...
Yeah, I mean, you talked about, I think, 2 points I want to pick up on. You mentioned military briefly, and you mentioned technology. Let's go to military and come back to some of the technology issues. Both are very important. Tom, we've had a lot of activity. We've had a lot of fighter planes from the PRC, which have violated across the median line in the Strait of Taiwan. And you've got the U.S. talking about a big military package of arms sales to Taiwan. Seems like the military side is really ratcheting up. Give us the kind of short term, like what's happened in the last week or two, as well as spin us forward. I mean, should we, sitting in Hong Kong, be worried about war in Taiwan?
Yeah, so when Secretary Cross was in Taipei, he was greeted with about 40 fighter jets crossing over the median line in the Taiwan Strait. The PLA had said that it was a routine military drill, but then after Taiwanese counterparts in the government said that you violated the median line, now there's potentially a new change in the status quo where the PRC is saying there is no median line. So we could have potentially in the future Chinese fighter jets flying closer and closer to Taiwan, violating its air defense identification zone. It's happened in the past, like when Secretary Azar was in Taipei for his visit last month, there was one jet that flew past. So we went from one jet 1 month ago to 40 now. So that's a very severe escalation just for a visit for trade negotiations and to pay respects at a funeral. So what'll happen if the trade representative of the United States visits Taiwan to sign a deal, or there's more negotiations? What is the next step in the escalation ladder, which is quite worrying? Will there be a sea contingent to complement the air contingent? It's at certain point there's going to have the potential to be an accident if there's going to be Taiwanese jets answering to kind of shoo away these jets. There could be United States Navy activity there to show support for Taiwan and to kind of show that China doesn't have dominance in that area. So the next few weeks, next few months, I don't think it's good news. It's going to be interesting to say the least.
Yeah. Jimmy, you want to comment on the military side?
I'm not worried about actually the conflicts. Even they have an accident, it won't expand into even a small scale war, because this is not what the CCP wants, and this is something the US knows. They are not taking a big risk of war this time, and that's why they have been very aggressive. They have to be very aggressive, because this is the time that they have to set everything in Asia to prepare for China's uprise. And I even think that, Secretary Pompeo may be going to Taiwan very soon. Whether he will go there before the end of the election, using it as a help or promotion for Trump's campaign, if not before the election, definitely after that. I don't see the upgrading of Taiwan's status is going to stop here. I think they will go all the way. I even think that it's possible that Japan is changing its constitution and remilitarize its armies and all that. They may be able to spare some of the troops in Japan to be moved to Taiwan. And that is not an impossibility. It was an impossibility then. But I think this is a possibility under the Trump administration. That's why it's important that Trump get re-elected.
Well, I think we might disagree on Trump's reelection, but I think your prediction of Pompeo's visit and a continued upgrade in U.S. relations is really really interesting. You want to comment on that, Tom?
Yeah, with election season coming up, or we're in the midst of election season, nothing's at the table, I don't think. I think obviously President Trump would not show up, but I think Pompeo, it's a possibility. I think it's more likely some other one that's less significant than Pompeo might show up. But again, with the China issue being a big part of at least the foreign policy aspect of the presidential campaign, Pompeo could come. This trade deal could really be pushed through, which wouldn't necessarily be good for either side. But yeah, I don't know what will happen with the election season, but as Jimmy was saying, there's a whole realm of possibilities that could happen as long as China is the main foreign policy issue between Joe Biden and Donald Trump.
Right.
Yeah. Tom, talk a little more about the trade deal. Before we went on air, you said it had gotten a lot more momentum than you had expected. Just fill the listeners or the viewers in on why it's important and what some of the key elements are.
Yeah, so before I came on, I looked up. So on August 28th, President Tsai announced that she was easing restrictions on U.S. pork imports, and that kind of seemed to be the cork in the bottle, where now, without that restriction, there's nothing to stop this agreement from going forward. It had been a sticking point under the previous Taiwan administration under President Ma. President Tsai has eased it, and now we have members of Congress in the House and in the Senate writing letters to the U.S. trade representative to really get the ball rolling on this. And I think another aspect that kind of happened earlier in August earlier in the year was the TSMC announcement with the factory in Arizona. Because as Jimmy was saying with tech, I think tech is going to be a very key part of this agreement, because with the factory in Arizona, with TSMC producing almost every chip that anyone needs in the world, it benefits the United States in that way, where we'll now have a solidified agreement to get those chips into the United States more easily. On top of that, the restrictions against Huawei, where now TSMC is prevented from shipping things to them. So I think that there are a lot of chips aligned perfectly for the capstone being the announcement on pork. And now we're less than a month away, and we have the highest member of the State Department visiting Taiwan in decades to kind of show support for the new dialogue that was announced in addition to the trade agreement. So within less than a month, we're seeing so much more momentum than we've had for other trade agreements. And it's also bipartisan. And in an election season, finding something that both Democrats and Republicans agree on is very rare, especially when it comes to trade. Like we saw how in 2016, the TPP essentially collapsed because it didn't have enough support on either side. And then we saw with the new NAFTA, to having a free trade agreement have the support of both Democrats and Republicans without too many major sticking points is kind of a big deal.
Yeah, and let
me add a little bit to the trade deal. I think the lifting of the American beef and pork ban in Taiwan actually paved the way for a fast-track trade deal, because the Taiwanese used to be very opposed. I don't know why, to anything American, American imports and all that. They are very resistant to it. Now, all of a sudden, I think people just realize that the security is from the support of the U.S. And from this pork and beef ban lifting, you see that, it's very smooth. And I think the trade deal also opens Taiwan to the world in a very significant way, because Taiwan used to be very parochial. They don't look outside, they don't look out to the world just because of the persecution, embargo, whatever China has engineered in everywhere. But now, U.S. is taking the lead to open up Taiwan, and I think all their other Western countries will follow suit. And now is for Taiwan to face the world and become more internationalized. And the trade deal is taking this step forward in a big way.
Yeah, it's interesting because go ahead, Tom.
To piggyback on that, I think the negotiations with the trade deal with the U.S. will also help Taiwan with the new TPP, because Taiwan has expressed interest in joining the new version of the TPP after the United States left. So proving that Taiwan can make the necessary economic reforms and reduce those economic barriers for having an agreement with the United States should make it smooth sailing then for Taiwan to then join the new TPP if it so chooses.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because there's so much focus on things like pork, these, agricultural products, because of the importance of rural constituencies. And yet, as Tom mentioned earlier, I think it's really significant that Keith Krach met Morris Chang. Now, Morris is a pretty low-key guy, not that well known outside of the industry, but I mean, he is one of the giants in the IT industry. And what he did with TSMC, starting in 1987, was to revolutionize the electronics industry. If one of us went to Morris, or now Mark Liu is running it, with a kind of sketch of a chip on the back of an envelope that we drew up in a Silicon Valley coffee shop, next week he could make 10. If the thing takes off, he can make 10 billion. I mean, he has outsourced the manufacture of chips and made our world possible. TSMC, it looks like some other companies are just going to have to choose between the U.S. and China. And as they've chosen with that, I think it was about $8 billion planned investment in Arizona.
I don't think they have a choice.
They don't have a choice. Yeah.
So the U.S. is the biggest military power, and the U.S. is where the technology is. They can't do without the U.S.
And the market. So let me kick it back to you guys. China's had very, very aggressive ambitions. I mean, Shenzhen says it's the answer to Silicon Valley. I would be with Jimmy and say Taiwan is Asia's Silicon Valley. It's really creative. It's open. But China's made a lot of progress. Is it too late, really? I mean, is the Trump administration reacting too late in terms of trying to use technology to essentially crimp China's militarized rise? Tom?
Yeah, Tom.
I don't think it's too late, because I'm working actually on a project right now on TSMC and semiconductors there, and right now China is not even meeting its own goals for semiconductor production. So Made in China 2025, China is supposed to produce domestically about 70% of its own semiconductors, and there's one report that by 2024 it'll get to maybe 21%. So I don't think it's too late. I think we'll see what happens with TSMC, because as you're saying, it was forced to make a decision. It could either abide by U.S. law or these new restrictions, or it could face the anger of the United States government. And since Apple and all these other major U.S. companies do business with TSMC, it was a pretty easy decision. Like, it's losing, I think it was in 2019, it was 14% of its business was from Huawei. So it's losing a big chunk of its business, but as it gets better and better at these chips, like it's working on the 5 nanometer, it's developing 3, and it's going to get to 2 in a few years. So if TSMC makes itself the only company in the world that can develop these high-tech chips, which, by the way, are used in the F-35 program, so the U.S. military is keenly aware of the role that TSMC plays. So having Taiwan remain Taiwan and have an economic and security situation be stable is good for the U.S. military as well. So I think that obviously TSMC is aware of the situation. It would prefer to be able to do business with both sides, but it had to make a choice, and it chose, at least right now, it chose the right decision.
Yeah. Hey, we've got about 5 more minutes before Tom and I are going to drop off.
I think we go a little bit more if we need.
Okay.
I think it's not too late. I think first, by sanctioning the chips to China, Huawei has to stop its 70% of the production. And another one is called what? ETC? What's that? The other big ones. I forget about them.
Oh, ZTE.
Yes, ZTE also, has to give up 40%, 70% of the production. And also, we have to understand, technology development is not a development on its own. It has to develop related to other technology. The complementary technology which helps any innovation is crucial. If the U.S. sanction the other part of the technology, even the technology you are researching will be affected. So the Chinese, they are focusing on creating chips. If they are not having other complementary technology for them to test and research the chips they want, that will delay them for a long time. Technology is it's a combination. It's not an island on its own.
Yeah. No, I think that's very important. It's a combination, and generally development thrives in more open societies with a free flow of information. China is a pretty good argument that, an alternative may be possible. And I think we look at things like artificial intelligence, where China has put a lot of money in, and also the government has worked very closely with private companies, the government keeping the upper hand, without concern about data privacy and other issues, to have a lot of data going in. And I think certainly during COVID, we've seen a lot of progress with artificial intelligence, particularly things like facial recognition, also a lot of problems. But look, China's, I think, giving the kind of open Western model a run for its money in terms of seeing whether or not a closed authoritarian system can often also make technological progress. But I think Jimmy's point that technology is not an isolated island, but the technology is a combination. It's not like breakthrough developments as much as putting things together and combining and recombining. So, we'll see. I'd like to hear a little more from you, Tom, given that you're doing this semiconductor project. Kind of overall view of China and technology and the Made in 2025 program.
Yeah, I think the most interesting part of how China's developing is, at least within its semiconductor industry, it's throwing a lot of money at it. It's doing okay in that regard, but who are they hiring to do the work? Most of the head people of these companies that come from Taiwan. So while the equipment can be made in China, they're poaching people from Taiwan. A lot of TSMC executives are finding their way as CEO and COO of all these companies. So while China is this closed society and it's developing AI and it's developing all these technologies, it's still hiring away people who were able to develop their own businesses in a free society. So it shows that China can get to a certain point, but it needs that help. It's still not quite there yet, where it needs to throw millions of dollars at people to get them to cross the Taiwan Strait to develop these new businesses. So I give China credit for having all of this money and giving all these incentives, but at the end of the day, if you look at who runs these companies, they come from Taiwan.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point. It hasn't been expressed enough that how many TSMC people in particular have been poached to work at senior levels of the Chinese chip industry. But I should say it's beyond that. I mean, I've met Koreans and others, in various parts of the electronics industry. I think there are Japanese there. But, on the other hand, Korea and Taiwan did this a generation ago, too. So it doesn't mean that it's impossible. But I think Tom's point is a great cautionary lesson, in the sense that you can have Tsinghua and Beidon, can have all these overseas trained students, but it's very interesting that so many more than I think most people realize of senior people in the industry are coming from TSMC, from Taiwan, from Korea, from elsewhere around the region.
And from overseas.
Yeah.
I think those people will have to leave when the embargo on technology is in place. Because, there's nothing for them to work on. And if those people leave and the new technology people won't go to China, one thing they will lose in their research is also peer pressure. If they don't have the peer pressure, the good people will leave. Why people all aggregate to Silicon Valley in the US is very simple. Because in the Silicon Valley, you go to breakfast at 8 o'clock with a good idea. By 10 o'clock, your idea is killed. So with the peer pressure, the evolution of idea is so fast. Without the peer pressure, you can have a good idea and embrace it and love it for 2 months, 2 years. So this is what China is facing. You know, the technology embargo from the US will lead to the technology embargo of all the Western countries. Because all the Western country needs the US technology to complement it. They have no choice but to do that.
Yeah.
And that will be a fatal blow to the Chinese economy and development. It's not a simple thing. Just this embargo of technology could be a very fatal blow to China. Because their past technology development relying on a lot of US technology. Not just their own. All they have to develop is just to put all this together. Now, if they don't have all these parts to put together, they can do nothing. Because research is not just the surface of it. Research has a history, and that technical history is in the US. Like Tom said, that the free flow of information and all that tradition is very important for technology investment. Development. So I think this is going to be Taiwan's chance to become the technology hub of Asia, and the demise of China's technology business.
Let's, if you don't mind, let me take the last few minutes and let's talk about some foreign relations issues. Tom, you've done some thinking about the fallout from the Czech delegation visit. We also have some other foreign policy issues such as Taiwan and Somaliland. Sort of just help wrap things up in terms of what kind of progress, I guess would probably be the word, Taiwan is making as far as foreign relations are concerned.
Yeah, it's been an interesting summer where Taiwan is kind of reversing its fortune over the previous 4 years, where China was poaching certain allies away. But now we're seeing these smaller states kind of fight back in a way, where with Somaliland, no country in the world recognizes it. It's kind of the Taiwan of Africa, except it's been around since the early 90s, since the end of the Civil War. So I think that's a great relationship for the two of them to develop, where Taiwan can help Somaliland kind of navigate that path on how do you fight for recognition in a place that's it's in the Horn of Africa. That's just as important for the Middle East as the Taiwan Strait is for Asia. So there's a lot of lessons that the two of those countries can learn for each other. And then with the Czech visit, it just shows that how China is willing to make threats and throw its economic weight at even just a small country like the Czech Republic, where it's the president of the Czech Senate is visiting, not the president of the Czech Republic, not the foreign minister of the Czech Republic. It would be if like Nancy Pelosi goes to visit Taiwan. And the amount of vitriol that was thrown at this delegation, it shows how China will deal with smaller countries. Like with Australia and COVID, they had tariffs on barley and beef. So we're seeing how some countries are getting threatened by China, and they're just saying, we have our own foreign policy. Taiwan is a part of that foreign policy, and you're not going to stop us no matter what the consequences are. So we'll see what other countries do. I think the Czech visit is a very interesting moment. What will the next country be that kind of defies China's threats and visits? I hope there's another one in the next few months, because there needs to be that momentum to complement the U.S. trade agreement, because it can't always just be the United States that backs Taiwan. Yes, the United States military supports Taiwan, but Taiwan needs to also build a multilateral coalition of support if it wants to get any headway into any international organizations that it's been boxed out of over the past few years.
Well, I think the U.S. leadership definitely is very important. The greater support the U.S. for Taiwan, the more willing or more necessary for the other countries to come around, to come to aid of the party. And also, just using what Mark said earlier, the pandemic was a Pearl Harbor to the world that really woke up the world to the face, the real face of CCP. I think, because it changes people's mind. Like say the same as Pearl Harbor changed Americans' mind. American was not supporting the war until the Pearl Harbor, and the whole world was not against China. They are a bit critical, but they were not against China. But the pandemic turned them around, and they all become very critical and even hostile, and that changes the politics. I think that European politics are being changed by people's resentment against BBC.
Well, I think that's a great note for the three of us to end our portion of the broadcast today. So, Jimmy, why don't we say goodbye to you? Tom and I will drop off, and you can do some Q&A with the other viewers. So,
okay.
As always, thank you.
But Tom, please come back. I think
Thank
the
you.
Taiwan issue is going to be a very hot issue for the next year or two. We will talk about a lot of it, because I think what you said about Taiwan, very soon the European will follow up to go, and the US will upgrade it with, more senior officials. I think that will make it very interesting. I think that's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's inevitable.
Yeah, I hope
that's
so.
Going to happen. That's going to happen.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Tom.
Yeah,
thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shattuck and Dr. Clifford, for that very lively discussion. We'll now move right on to audience questions, and we have one of our audience members in here. Hi, Christine. Can you hear us? Hello, Christine. Christine just dropped off right now. Since today we had a very lively discussion, why don't we wrap it up with a question that relates to the latest development in Hong Kong. So just this week, Hong Kong authorities announced a new kind of screening system where they limit the media representatives that they will recognize. What do you think of this development, and how do you see it affecting the media landscape in Hong Kong, or specifically for Apple Daily?
Well, I think this is just an indication that Hong Kong becomes a police state. The police is over above the law, or take the law into their hands. That should not be what the police do, because how do you decide what is a media company, what is not a media company in today's internet world? And even if they have to stop it, stop those student reporters or online reporters, they cannot stop all the people with a cell phone. People with a cell phone will automatically become a reporter when something happens next to them. This is something they cannot change. I don't think they will, I think they destroy Hong Kong's reputation as a place having the freedom of speech, but they cannot stop people reporting and taking videos of what happened and give to the medias. I just think this is a stupid way to damage Hong Kong without getting anything back. I think that's it. I don't think we will be affected. I don't think Hong Kong people's Hong Kong media's report will be affected, but definitely Hong Kong's freedom of speech is now in crisis, or is no longer there.
Yes,
simply just because anybody who writes something or says something have to worry about the consequences. When you have to worry about what you say and what you write, freedom of speech is not there. Because if it's free, I don't have to worry. So, I think that, like I said, Hong Kong is losing its soul. The city looks the same, but it no longer what make Hong Kong is Hong Kong. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments and for your time today. And we also thank our audience for joining us. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. 啊，呢個好啲，嗰個聽唔到喎，呢個奇怪。